Hello everyone, this is Lam here. In today's video, I want to talk a little bit about the camera companies that were at CES 2019. I always find it interesting because the way that they present themselves in CES kind of tells you a little bit about the company and also how they view their products. While you're looking through the B-roll, definitely look at the ambiance of the place, look at what they're actually demoing, look at the floor space that they're providing for their camera systems, and also look at the demographic, look at the people that are actually going through and looking through all of their products because it is quite interesting. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first one we're going to talk about is Panasonic because they're right at the front and they also have a huge area for all of their products. One of the things that you'll notice is that it's very busy in here. It's nicely lowly lit so you can kind of just mingle and kind of stay in one place and feel like you're very comfortable, that you're kind of welcomed in there. The thing that you will notice is that the camera placement or the camera booth is super small. It's literally like a section of the wall. You can tell that it's not very important to them. And for anybody who's actually kind of worried on whether or not they're going to continue to support the micro four thirds systems, even though they're coming out with a full frame sensor, I feel like you should be worried because when you actually go through the Panasonic place, you don't really feel like their camera brand is all that important in the grand scheme of things when compared to their other products. This is something that you should be concerned about as a regular consumer. I'm sure the GH line will still continue to do well and they will continue to bring out cameras in that line. That's more because the cinematographers have really adopted that as a high-grade B-roll camera. Now, as a regular consumer, you might actually be worried that they might not support your product as much as other brands would. That's a legitimate worry, and you can definitely see it when you go through the Panasonic booths. One thing that you'll notice when you go through the Panasonic area is that it is a super busy area. There are plenty of people walking around of all demographics. In fact, because they're at the front, it's actually kind of hard to walk through that area. You almost feel like you don't want to. And a lot of times I just skip Panasonic because I just don't want to deal with having to be stuck in a crowd like that. They do place their camera line on the outside, so it's a little bit easier to get to. But overall, you can tell that their camera brand isn't all that important when it comes to this consumer electronics show. They just have other bigger fish to fry. Now, I do want to compare and contrast this with Samsung because they also legitimately have a huge booth. And as you know, they are the market leaders in smartphones with their Galaxy line and their Android phones. This is something that's super important to them, and you can really tell when you go to the Samsung booth. The funny thing is that if you go into the Samsung booth and you actually look for their cameras, because they do have a few cameras, they are non-existent. I couldn't even find them. And it's so busy in there, I didn't even feel like going to look for it. They have their smartphone line. You can tell that that's their bread and butter. And they don't really feel a need to actually have to do camera equipment. And that really shows when you actually go into the Samsung booths. There are plenty of pictures in there, but they're all from smartphones. They really want to show the capabilities of their smartphone lines, their screens, and also other consumer electronics, but nothing in terms of cameras. Now, if we walk down a little bit further, we come across our first camera manufacturer, which is Canon. And when you walk in there, you get a completely different feel than what we see from Samsung and what we see from Panasonic. This is a brightly lit area. This is where people are dressed professionally. You can tell just by talking to them, and I've done this a few times, is that they're there to answer your questions and they're there to sell you products and to talk to the big players. A lot of people that go in there, they're dressed in suits. It's just a completely different demographic when you walk in there. And also when you actually walk up to the product lines, they're there kind of just to demo it. There is kind of places where you can take pictures, but really overall, it's kind of a place where you don't really feel comfortable as a small consumer. This is just not a place where you would just walk in and spend a lot of time, in my opinion. So anytime I'm over at the Canon booth, I'm usually only there to get a specific question answered, or if I want to look at a specific product. I really don't hang out there to try to find out about new things or what they're working on because it just feels like an unfriendly place. You can tell that this is big business. This is corporate talk. This is not a place for, small little content creators to want to be. So if you feel like they kind of ignore you, trust me, when you actually go into their booths, you kind of feel that way as well. This is just big business. Canon actually has a couple of these booths throughout CES. So in each of the big wings, there is actually a Canon area where you can actually go to. Also, on a side note, if you look right here, there is Think Media right there talking to some Canon representatives. I'm sure they're doing some sponsored videos right there. So there are some big YouTubers that do walk through the Canon facility. We all know that there are a bunch of big YouTubers that use Canon products, and I'm sure they get some sort of endorsements or sponsors, and yeah, they hang around here. So you do see them around every once in a while. All right, so at the very back is the Sony area, and this year Sony actually kind of went a little bit light. They're a little bit more open. Last year it was much more glitzy, but it's still a very nice area. As you can see when we first walk in, over on the right, that's where all their camera stuff is. The interesting thing about Sony is that their camera line is as big as all of their other product lines. So we're talking about TVs, gaming, audio, virtual reality. They're all about the same size. And that's kind of something that's really interesting about Sony, is that their camera line really isn't making them any more money than the other product lines. In fact, you can say that, their video game line and their television line, which they're really big players and they make a lot of money in those areas, they're all equally important in terms of Sony, which is so interesting because we all know Sony has been dumping a lot of money into the camera lines in the last few years. They have a full range of cameras, well, in terms of full frame anyways. They're making a bunch of G Master lenses to compete with all the other camera manufacturers. And that's the reason why Sony is really interesting, is because when you go visit places like Panasonic and Samsung, you can tell that their camera lines are unimportant, but Sony kind of places equal value in the camera line as opposed to all of their other product lines. So it goes to show that their camera line is important to them, and they're really sinking a lot of R&D money into it. Now, in terms of demographics, you can really tell that Sony has a very wide spectrum. From the young kids all the way to the older generation, everybody comes over and visits the Sony booth. So they get a huge demographic actually looking at almost all of their product lines. And what I really like about the Sony booth is that because it's in the back and it takes a little bit further to get to, the crowd kind of disperses a little bit. So anytime you actually go into the Sony area, you can actually easily walk around. It does get super busy at points. I've been in there where it's super crowded. There's usually almost always some room to move around in which you can visit each booth. There may be lines, but it's actually pretty well controlled. And the way that have it designed, there's not this huge center area where it's super empty, where people just get crowded around and it just becomes a mess. They actually put a stage in the center, which kind of makes people walk around in a circle. It just overall makes a lot of sense, and Sony does a good job every year of acting a little bit different. By the way, just as a side note, over in the audio area, they were actually showing off essentially a high-end MP3 player that cost like $8,500. And this is the reason why I like going to CES, is that this product I would never be able to get a chance to try anywhere else. It's just too expensive. There's no way there would be demo units of it. But at CES, they let you try it, and it's just something that's super cool and it's fun to do. So the next area to talk about is the Nikon area, which they can be a little bit hard to find because they're usually located more in the center. A lot of the big booths are kind of located towards the side, so you just go down the side wall and you can pretty much see all of them. But Nikon does a really good job of occupying a center area because they have these huge photos that kind of draw you in. As soon as you see the Nikon brand, you immediately see the photos and you kind of just wander over there just because you want to look at the photos. Of course, all of the big brands have great photography, but Nikon just does a really good job of balancing lighting with photos, with also the design of their booths. It's always kind of inviting to go over there. Now, having said all that, what I find is that when I go in there to look at the pictures, once I'm done looking at the pictures, I kind of have no reason to stay around. They don't really offer a lot of new products in a single year, and a lot of the lenses, once you test them out, there's really nothing else that you want to stick around for. Well, that's not true. They always have a great line of presenters. The problem with the presenters, there's actually several problems with the presentations, but let's first look at the people that are actually listening to the presentations. Here's a freeze frame of the people that are listening to the presentations. Can you see what is worrisome about this photo? If you look at the demographic that's actually listening to the presentations, a lot of them are actually quite old. They're on the side of retirement, right? These are the people that are going to be retiring. They're not going to be buying your camera products anytime soon because they're going towards retirement. And this is the reason why I kind of worry about Nikon, because year after year when I come back, I notice that their demographic doesn't really seem to be getting as younger as some of the other brands that we've been walking through. This is something that I've just noticed, and it's just something that's worrisome with a brand that I really love. It's that they're really not a brand that the younger generation is just attaching themselves to. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't young people coming in and looking at their stuff, or there's not any young Nikon shooters. Of course there is, but you just notice that predominantly it's the older folks that are coming into the Nikon booths and staying in there and also talking to them. Also, one of the reasons why I don't really like their presentations is that their presentations feel, for the lack of a better term, they feel a little old. They feel they feel like they draw the older crowd, and that's something that they really need to work on. You know, they need to inject some Red Bull and some energy drinks or alcohol or whatever to try to get some of the more younger people to listen to their presentations and also try the Nikon brand. This is something that in CES, it's very common not to see young people except to stand in line and get their pictures taken. You know, there are a lot of young people that want to get their pictures taken, but there's not a lot of young people like sitting there listening to the presentations, trying out their products. And as a brand that I really like and I grew up with, they really got to turn that around. They really got to, you know, inject some youth into their presentations, inject some youth into how they brand themselves, because I just don't see it every single time I come over to the Nikon booth. Now, for some of you, you may think that I'm saving the Fuji booth for last, but that's actually not true. Fuji doesn't actually have a booth at CES. They have a small little cubbyhole of an office, which they probably use to, you know, answer media and also do business back there, but they actually don't have a booth. That's kind of how small Fuji is, which I guess shows you how small or how niche a camera market that they're in right now. But hopefully that will change sometime soon and we will actually see a camera booth at CES for Fuji, but I have not seen it yet, maybe one day. But I still love their cameras and I use those predominantly. In fact, everything I shot for CES this year was on a Fuji camera. This is actually a first for me. The camera guy that I was working with wasn't all that familiar, so some of the drone videos didn't come out as well as previous years, but he's gonna learn the system and work on that. So that's all I have to say for this video. I just kind of want to give you a glimpse at what I was viewing when I was going through each booth. Tell me what you think. Am I accurate in my assessment when you were looking through the B-roll? Does it feel like what I said to you, or do you get a different vibe completely? I would love to know, because, you know, it's my opinion on this. I would love to know, but I have been to CES multiple years, and it's really interesting to see if the manufacturers have changed from year to year. I'll continue to do this. If it's interesting, please let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.